Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Commander Jason Duff. I am the director of the Midshipman Development Center, which is essentially the counseling center here at the United States Naval Academy. Some of you guys might be familiar with us from maybe some of our engagements before you even got here, your kids even got here. We have an opportunity to speak to candidates' parents during Candidates Parents Weekend. We just spoke yesterday to the centers of influence, which include teachers and guidance counselors and administrators from around the country. And so I think we have a really great opportunity in our position here to kind of educate and push out and make our resources known. But this evolution here, in speaking directly to the parents, the sponsors, is something that we feel is very worthwhile. When the home front knows what resources there are to support the midshipmen, it helps us to be more efficient and effective in our job in supporting them the best possible way. And so today I'll be joined by my colleague, the Assistant Director of the Midshipman Development Center, Dr. Jessica Moeller. You'll hear from her in a few moments. And both of us are just very happy to be here. I'd like to thank Captain Foreman for being the behind the scenes guy. And you may see his name on the emails and all the communications from the Naval Academy, and just know that he's working real hard for all of you guys. And any feedback regarding this evolution would be appreciated. But I'm looking forward to having a nice discussion with you guys today. Now, to that end, we asked that everybody keep their microphones on mute. Right now, there's about 50 of us, 52 if you count me and Jess. And then we're expecting upwards of 100. So what would be best is if you have questions, you put them in the chat, and then at the end, myself and Dr. Moeller will be able to respond to any questions that you may have. And so the plan is I'm going to speak to you guys just for a couple of minutes about what the Midshipman Development Center is and how we operate around the yard. And then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Moeller to get into our topic today, which is how to cultivate grit in your midshipmen. And Dr. Moeller is a clinical psychologist, but she's also a sport performance psychologist. And so we're just very fortunate to have had her here for a number of years. And she works with all the varsity athletes. She works with the teams, and she works with people that are struggling with passing the PRT or just want to be the best versions of themselves physically. It's just a great resource that we have here. So the Midshipman Development Center, let me tell you a little bit about us. That's me. Boom. So there we are. I'm going to make this bigger for myself. We believe that we have a direct impact in all of those different concepts that are part of the USNA mission. We believe that as the Midshipman Development Center, that we can directly impact the mission of developing the mids morally, mentally, and physically. And hopefully by the end of my short brief here, you understand why we believe that to be true. So this is us, right? We are an embedded psychological health clinic that provides readily accessible. We are coming to you live from Bancroft. We live where the mids live. And so we are very accessible. I'm looking out at the tennis courts right now. The 8th Wing gym is out this window, and I can hear them stomping above my head throughout the day at times. And so we are pretty readily available. And to that end, we bring the plebes in here during plebe summer so they know right from the start where we are and how they can access us. And hopefully they remember that, because it's a lot of learning during plebe summer. But for the most part, they find their way to us on their own or from the other helping entities around the yard. And so this is what makes up the MDC. This dynamic multi-service clinic has 12 providers and 1 clinic manager who keeps us on task. We have 5 psychologists, 2 social workers, 1 nutritionist, and 4 psychology externs. And so we exist to promote and enhance the adjustment, well-being, and development of the midshipmen through psychological, performance, and nutritional counseling services. And then also we consult and we train other entities around the yard, to include the faculty, to include the leadership, the company officers, the senior enlisted, and how to manage psychological health issues, how to recognize psychological health issues, and then take action on those things. And so we all have our jobs, but we all liaise with outside entities. So I will liaise with the battalion officers, the dep dons, the senior officers, the superintendent. Jessica Moeller is the liaison for the athletic trainers and the coaches. And we have another staff member that works with the faculty, and then someone who works with the company officers and the senior enlisted. And so we try to cover down to make sure that we can get messages to them and that they can reach into us and keep those lines of communication open. We are non-medical, and so people may ask what that means. I'll give you an example of how MDC came to be, and I'll explain why we are non-medical. MDC has been around for about 20 years or so. Before that, if there was any sort of psychological health issues, some sort of distress they needed to talk through, any sort of pressures they were experiencing from back home or here in their academic or military training, they'd have to go to the chaplains or to the medical side of the house. And if you were at Penn State or Notre Dame or some other entity around the country, and you were in a ROTC program, you could use the counseling services at that institution. And then when it came time to commission, you were good to go. Big Navy would never see that because counseling notes were over here, their medical records were here. And that wouldn't have been the case before MDC existed. And so now we give them the opportunity to come and talk to the things that they should be coming to talk to us about. The things that are hard to manage. Again, the stressors back home, the difficulties adjusting here, homesickness, sleep issues, things that they should deal with and try to get to the left of before they become bigger problems. And definitely not the types of things that should come back and somehow impact their ability to commission or graduate from this place or go into a certain service assignment. Now, any of those issues left unchecked, not addressed, not taken care of, can progress and become something more concerning. And so the MDC, all of my staff could work anywhere along the continuum of care, the continuum of severity of any of these issues, but we kind of focus here in a way that our promise is, if it's not going to affect their ability to commission or go into a certain assignment, we're going to take care of it here. And if it does need to be known, does need to be considered for those decision processes, they'll be referred to the medical side of the house. And that doesn't mean that their goals are no longer achievable or anything like that. The medical side of the house just documents it in a way where it gets considered. And we tell them if there's a beginning and a middle and an end to the story, issue identified, issue treated, issue resolved, then they're going to be in a better space to be successful, to get those things that they want. And the opposite of that is if you don't take care of the fact that you can't focus, you can't concentrate, you're feeling down, you're overwhelmed, you're over anxious, you're just not sleeping and taking care of yourself the best way, and you're not performing in the classroom or on the sport field or just in your physical demands that are here at the Naval Academy, you're not going to be the best version of yourself to move towards those goals of yours. And so that's how we operate as a non-medical counseling center. That's us. And so I'll just quickly run through, just so you know, you can call me a generalist. I've been in about 19 years. I was a nurse and a psychiatric nurse practitioner before becoming a clinical psychologist. Next to me is Miss Tina Randolph, our trauma specialist. There's Dr. Moeller, clinical and sport performance. That is Ms. Hickey, our registered dietitian. Starting at the second line there, from left to right, is one of our externs. They're senior psychology students. They're going to be doctors soon enough. And so the first two are externs. Dr. Judge is our third person there, our disordered eating specialist. Dr. Meng Cheng is our outreach coordinator. Third row there is Dr. Ratliff. She's our intake and triage specialist. And I can tell you that 2 years ago, there was times when we'd have a 3-week wait list, and that was just kind of the norm at certain times throughout the year. And that was out in town. That was pretty good. But we knew that with the resources and the support we had from the chain of command here, we could do better. And so we created and hired those 2 new positions, and we haven't had a wait list for psychology services in 2 years. So we're really happy about that. Next to Dr. Ratliff is Lieutenant Commander Julia von Herringen. Again, active duty psychologists. We consider ourselves generalists, jack of all trades, humbly stated. Another 2 externs, one right there that the young lady at the end just secured the Navy psychology internship for next year. So we're super proud of her and proud of all of our externs that are doing a great job. Warrior toughness. We talk a lot about warrior toughness around here, and this kind of is going to start to build towards our conversation today about grit. These are the conversations, these are the topics that our enlisted sailors are learning at Great Lakes and at other training commands around the country and around the Navy. And so we want to make sure that our future officers are also speaking the same language as our enlisted ranks. And so we talk about healthy behaviors, performance statements, recalibration, mindfulness, all these things that help people to be efficient and effective. This is what it looks like when you see it, out in the fleet, when you see the signs. And these aren't like throwaway things like mental rehearsal. What did we just finish up with? The Winter Olympics. You see the athlete at the top of the hill, literally envisioning themselves in every move or every flip that they're going to do, because it works and it matters. See yourself being successful. Bring that to fruition. There's actions, there's things that you want to do. Need to refocus, recalibrate. Inhale for 5 seconds, exhale for 7 is the ones here that they're promoting on the poster. There's different versions of that, but the idea of recalibration works. We could all use it throughout our day. Take a breather, get refocused, and get ready for the next evolution, the next thing that needs our attention. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And again, it ties right into grit. And then here's us doing our embedded support. We go out there in plebe summer, and we're not just sitting in our offices waiting for people to come to us. We go out there. It helps the midshipmen to become familiar with us and our services, but it also helps us to have direct conversations with them. And this picture is a prompt for me to share one of my favorite stories from plebe summer. These guys, you can tell they're dirty, they're tired. They've been going all morning, carrying the boats over their heads, lifting the logs, running, meeting the mission, the physical demands of plebe summer. And they look pretty good. However, when I stepped up, we were going to talk about mindfulness and grit and resilience. And I said, hey guys, we're going to run another 10 miles. And I got hit with the, hoo-yah, sir, the half-hearted, all right, sir, if you say so. And so it was a lead-in for me to make the example to them, as if you can take some behavior and apply value to it, that you can increase the likelihood of success of that behavior. So here's how we did it. I said, hey, it's hot today. They're like, yes, sir, it's hot. And it truly was. It was in the high 90s. And I said, oh, by the way, at the end of that 10-mile run is Grandma. And Grandma's power's out in this 90-plus degree weather, and her fridge is empty. And Grandma needs us to get there. And the kid in the front row says, we're going to get Grandma. And I said, we're going to get Grandma, 100%. And you saw them kind of all get excited, and they kind of laughed about it. And they knew we weren't going for another 10-mile run. But the idea was you could apply value to that thing that needed to be done, that thing that could, if you went the other direction of, oh, gosh, this thing I got to achieve, this thing I got to perform for. And as much as you can psych yourself up and put yourself in the right mindset to be successful, you can also go in the other direction. And so just that quick example for them of how they can do this throughout the day as they face all sorts of demands was pretty powerful. And hopefully that sticks with them. And we reinforce that throughout the year in different ways. So I think that's a good lead in for our conversation. That's us out there in plebe summer and all the different ways we meet them, again, out in the field, these in vivo experiences for us. But I think it's a good tie-in as I turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Moeller, as we talk about grit today. So I'll be hanging out. I'll be watching the chat, and I'll stick around if there's any questions afterwards. Over to you, Dr. Moeller.
Thank you, Commander Duff. Yeah, I'm excited to also speak about this. And I think it's actually a wonderful tie-in. Your example gets right into what I'm talking about today, which is grit. And I'm gonna go through some definitions here. There may be a little, a few words on my slides in some ways, but I hope that you end up with a takeaway around how to do this as a parent. My experience is I've been here for a number of years. About 20 years actually, and have gotten the opportunity to work on a number of different environments. And I keep coming back to the Naval Academy as kind of my home base in many ways. And actually, I may pick on that a little bit later as we go through the presentation. So, I think sometimes people don't fully understand what grit is. I think people can have some kind of different ideas about what it means and how it works. And it can be used in ways that are sometimes not helpful. I'm going to kind of stick to a definition here. I'm going to base most of my presentation on Angela Duckworth's information. Some of you may be familiar with her work. She's written a book. I'd certainly recommend it. She's done actually specific studies at military academies. So you'll hear kind of that definition and through that lens for sure. grit at the base of it, right, is kind of passion and perseverance for long-term goals. You could hear a little bit in Commander Duff's example, this idea of passion, right? Values. If it's doing it for something else, doing it for something bigger than myself, I care about, right, this family member in my life, so therefore I'm going to be willing to run an extra 10 miles. That's passion, and passion is a key component of grit. And you're going to hear me say this kind of several times as I talk through it. This has been an old concept. This is not something new, right? It used to be called a strength of will. Right. And there's really kind of two pillars of grit as we think about this. One is this perseverance of effort, right? The idea, and I think that's what most people think about specifically with grit, is this like keep going, overcome setbacks. What sometimes I think is missed in this is this second pillar, which is really this consistency of interest, which is really, that's the passion part, right? That there's like this higher order thing that you want to achieve that really guides your decision making and your willingness to persevere. As again said, like there's really a passion factor, right? It's not just effort, right? You really want to have a personal connection to what it is that you're doing. And what I'll ask the parents and sponsors to take a moment to think about is kind of what your passions are, right? Passion comes in a lot of different ways, right? It may be work, right? It could be family. It could be a hobby that you do. I'd ask you to think about, right? Like moments in which you are engaged in that passion. Maybe ways in which, like, how do you approach that passion? When something got in the way of you, achieving that long-term goal, how did you cope with it? I think having a little bit of insight into what your perspective has been and what your life experience has been can be really helpful as you think about supporting those around you as they move towards developing their own, sense of grit. What I want to kind of talk about a little bit here is what it isn't. Grit is not talent or luck. Often people, will kind of think there's some kind of magical part of grit. It really isn't. And I'll get to this a little bit later why. It isn't how intensely for a moment you want something. It's not just about that moment. It's about connecting it usually to kind of a larger goal, a larger passion, something you're moving towards. Right, it's called an ultimate concern, right? That's what researchers have called it. Right. Really a goal you care about so much that it organizes you and gives meaning. Right. And again, I think that's what Commander Duff's example of, why would you run those 10 miles? If you just had to run them, doesn't feel good. But I was running them to help somebody out who's incredibly important in my life, right? Like I wouldn't even think twice about it and I would engage in that. Even when you have a setback, achieving that goal, right? Even when progress towards that goal is somehow halted, right? We tend to see grit as kind of a continued perseverance towards whatever that goal might be. This is important, right? We tend to see, and this is actually out of Angela Duckworth's work, that there are several benefits, right? It's a wonderful predictor of success. I think that's really important to recognize that your passion is a predictor of success. It's not just hard work. Your passion is a predictor of success, right? Higher levels of grit, right, are linked to things like academic success, right? They are linked to achievement, right? So again, passion and hard work linked to achievement. They allow us to feel more stable over time. So when we kind of have higher levels of grit, right, we're more committed to our life goals. Even in there, I knew I was talking to parents, or maybe even a little more marital stability is what we find, right? So for those of you who are in partnered relationships, right? We tend to see mental well-being as a part of this as well. So again, this is what the research kind of links to. You could probably see some reasons why, it's important for a service academy population. Probably why you would understand that it's something that I think about and try to certainly cultivate in the midshipmen that I work with. My experiences, I think that my bio is on there, but my experience has certainly, as I said, mostly been here. I've had the opportunity as well to work in pro baseball, and I'm currently in Olympic sport And so, I get to kind of enter into these other worlds, and working with youth and parents at sometimes. So, I tend to see grit tends to weave amongst all of the domains that I walk into. And certainly when passion begins to fade in any of these domains, right, grit will also be harder to cultivate. I'm going to tell just a brief story about myself. You saw the pictures of us out at Plebe Summer. I'm often out at the endurance course. I love going out there in the summertime. I do a little warrior toughness training when I'm there. Your children this year, I don't know why this year, but this year they asked me quite frequently, how long have I worked here? And then when I said how long, they then followed up with why. What an important question. I'll be honest, it was quite easy for me to answer. Right. I have found it to be an incredible privilege to work in a military service environment. Right. I certainly feel a passion in it, and I feel like I'm contributing to something bigger than myself. It didn't even take me too long to kind of think of an answer for your children, and they kind of smiled, I think, at my answer. But it's an interesting question, right? Like, why do we continue to do the things we do? I think it's good to understand that. I'll encourage you as well to think about that for yourself. So how do we do this? There's a lot of right. I just want to give you this heads up. There's a lot of right and only a little wrong in this process. So I want to start with that framework, that you understand that, there are very few ways we really do this in wrong ways, but a lot of ways we really help develop, cultivate grit in our children, and certainly as sponsor parents as well. And in fact, actually, many of you have already done this, because there's some idea they probably have some level of grit if they decided to apply here. So recognize that's also so important. There are a lot of different ways in which midshipmen have an opportunity to develop grit at the academy. I think the first one that often comes to mind is within the military context. Many plebes who arrive here have a lot of passion about joining the military. It's a really core component of what they want to do. And so when days get hard, or when they have kind of failures or setbacks, oftentimes they can connect to this kind of larger passion that they have, that today is hard, but I know that this is moving me towards the goal that I have, and so I'm willing to continue to work towards it. Some of your midshipmen at times might be questioning, that military service. I don't know, we noticed that, over the 4 years here, there's all kinds of developmental changes that occur. And as they kind of move away from home, they can develop kind of, shifting values as they move through their college experience. And so at times, maybe that's not, the biggest kind of passion for them. Maybe it's their academics. And they develop, a love for engineering, and they find incredibly passionate about, building things and doing research projects. And that becomes the passion. That's not a problem, right? You can have shifting passions, as long as you understand that it's shifting, and that's what I'm moving towards. And so maybe the military is not going to be my top passion for the moment. It's going to shift a little more towards my academics. And I'm willing to tolerate hard days here, because I now really want to pursue this academic goal. And I hear a lot of students talk about that in some ways. For some of them, it's sport, That's where their passion lies, And they think, again, it's going to be wonderful to serve their country, but it's not what they're doing in this moment. And so they're incredibly passionate about pursuing their sport, and they know then they have to kind of meet all their military standards, because they really want to finish their career as an athlete, and a midshipman athlete specifically. I find sometimes that it's the ECA. We have our own extracurricular activity that comes actually out of the Midshipman Development Center. It's called the Peer Advisor Program. I assume some of your children are in it, They really enjoy helping others and supporting others as they move through their 4 years here. And that's what they're incredibly passionate about. So, they have a hard day, and they recognize that their value and their passion is really towards helping others. That's what they really connect with. And so, that's where they're going to connect with that day, even though they may not be able to see their service, 2 years from now as being the thing that they're looking towards. others, it's relationships. Right. And, that could be something that is, there's some relationship that's really valuable to them, right? Maybe they, connect to a parent who maybe have military service, or a grandparent who has military service. And they think like that honoring that relationship is really important to them. And so that's their passion, and they're going to work hard towards that because that's their passion. Right. The idea essentially is that, right, we are able to recognize what we are passionate about and then allow that to guide our effort and our work. And that's what grit is. And I'm sure you've seen lots of different examples in your lives. You may even notice that, in the example I had you think about a couple minutes ago, right? Some of you may have thought about your work. Some of you may have thought, well, work is kind of just an ends to, means. It's the way in which I, go about my days. But I really love, this other aspect. I'm really into family, right? So that's going to be my main passion. And my, work just allows me, right, to raise the family in the way in which I want to. And so while my everyday job is not my passion, right, I get it met through these other ways. And so that's why I'm willing to work hard. So the idea is, right, there are lots of ways we can find passion. Thinking about what it is for you, I think, can be really helpful. And then also, right, translating that to our children is valuable. So why sometimes, hold on one second. Sorry. So there we go. So why sometimes, right, as parents or maybe sponsors, do we kind of get caught up in some other dynamics around us that may make us not really help get our children gritty? So these are a few. These were, talked about specifically by a man named Dr. Taylor. He does a lot of research in youth sport, actually, and looking at trajectories of youth athletes and parenting. So, for those of you also who might still have children at home, I'll encourage you to think about this one as well. But sometimes parents can over-identify with their child, right? That happens. And sometimes when you over-identify with your child, you're not really thinking about their passion. You're kind of thinking about yours, right? So there's something about like, you think it would have been so cool to come to the academy. And that was like, would have been like your first choice. The challenge of that is, right, that when, we over-identify at times with our children, it can kind of interfere with their ability to really develop that passion on their own. It's not about being passionate for somebody else's desires, right? It's about being passionate for our own that helps us be gritty. Living vicariously. I'm sure some of you have done this in your lives, right? Where we kind of, we see their joy in what they're doing. We see their experience and we're like, oh my gosh, that would be so awesome. I would love to do that too. And so you kind of live vicariously through your child. The challenge of that, right, is that, the child can recognize that like your happiness, which is the next piece, is coming from them and not from yourself, right? And that can really interfere with their ability to develop their own passions, right? As that moves into this idea of happiness, right? I think it's good for parents to foster their own happiness, right? To foster their own passions. I'm going to say this here in a little bit, and in probably a little more direct ways. If we're not fostering our own happiness, if you're not, right, fostering your own happiness as a parent, it can really interfere again with your child's, their own goals. Sometimes we lose perspective, right? Sponsors, parents, right? The adult can kind of lose perspective. They can recognize that like they get caught up maybe in like this test grade or like this physical readiness test score or right, like this moment, right? Instead of recognizing that like this is a journey, it's 4 years. And there are going to be moments when people have setbacks, they're going to fail. That's all part of the process of getting them to the end. And so I think it's really helpful to take some perspective in that, right? That like this thing in this moment may not be so bad. And if we can kind of expand out the aperture of it to the longer term. The other piece that we tend to see with parents is they kind of push before, a child is really developmentally ready for the next piece. One of the things I noticed here, right, is that, we will have students who come in who, may not exactly know what they want to do when they grow up, right? They're 18 years old. They don't know exactly what they want to serve, but, the parent has their ideas about what the child should do. And, maybe the child isn't ready yet to kind of pick. And that's why we have a developmental process, right? We don't have to pick what they want to do when they're plebes, right? They get an opportunity to wait until they're second class. And so, I always encourage parents to kind of be supportive in this process. But if they're not ready yet to kind of pick what it is they're going to be most passionate about in their service selection or their major, right? Or, some other aspect of their lives, like we want to wait until they're ready because the system's going to get them there. And they only have to pick, right? By the time it's time to pick. So, I think it's good. And it's going to change, right? Some of you may be like, well, my child said they dreamed of being an aviator. Now they're telling me they want to be a Marine Corps officer. Like, how did that passion change? Well, it's because they got older, right? And that does change. And so, right, when we can kind of just be supported to that process, not put too much of our information and too much of our expectations on what they're choosing, it can really help them develop their own passion, and then they're more willing to work harder towards that. Just a few of the parent pitfalls. So I'm going to continue on with a couple what you can do as a parent to help support this process. Again, I want you to remind yourself in the background, right? Many more right than wrong answers here. So I just really want you to remember that. So these are some things we can do as parents, or what you can do as parents. It can be taught, right? Actually, you saw Commander Duff earlier in the slides talked about warrior toughness. That's because there are skills that we can actually teach to help somebody become more gritty. There's some interesting information about genetics and grittiness, but we know we can teach it. And so that's really important. Right. So it is not fixed. It's not something like you're born with and that you can't have it if you don't have it by age, 20. You hear all kinds of stories about developmentally when somebody's kind of ready to push. Some could have a little bit of a genetic head start, but again, it's developed through experience. I will, before I kind of get into some of these strategies, I want to at least acknowledge, Doctors Raver and Ledford from the United States Naval Academy have done a lot of writing in this area. And so, I did pull from some of their research, which also is based on a lot of Angela Duckworth's research and grit. So, what they've kind of talked about is strategies to build grit for how do parents do this effectively. So temporal perspective, that sounds like a little bit fancy, I think, but I already mentioned this a little bit, right? The idea is we want to have a large perspective, right? You may have small wins, kind of small failures, right? That's a normal part of the process. We can recognize there's a longer term goal that they're working towards, and that today's small failure or win does not mean that goal is usually unattainable, right? But just to have more acceptance and recognize we're in the long game here. It's a 4-year process to get through. And it's even longer to kind of develop other kind of life skills and abilities. And so, recognizing that you don't have to do it all right now. That's not what is necessary. That we're evaluating. Right? We want them to be finding things that they are really passionate about. What are they interested in? Right? You might ask your child, as they decide to do their work today, what do they find to be the most interesting? Where do they start their homework? A lot of times, students will kind of start their homework with the piece that they find most interesting. Some of them do the opposite. They start with the hardest. But, you might want to ask, today when you were kind of, going through your day, what did you find most interesting? Because again, we know if they can hone in on what was really truly passionate to them or interesting to them, right, they will be able to persist and work hard, way above and beyond, right, what they might expect, and really will be willing to seek out new challenges in that area. Alignment. So again, right, thinking about goals that match their personal interests. And one of the things we will tend to hear at the MDC, which again, it's not odd, and parents aren't bad for saying this, right? They're just normal parents, and that is they'll say things like, I think you should do this because it's going to bring you the most success, or that's where the most achievement is. And as I've actually already shared with you, what we know is that your child will be most successful if they're engaged in something that they're passionate about. Doesn't matter the subject area, doesn't matter the field, but they will have the most success and happiness if they're pursuing their passion.
I think is important data to recognize. And again, it doesn't have to only be their passion in their work life, right? It can be passion in other areas. But again, I think that that's really important to think about as you're kind of supporting your children and thinking about their goals, their values. Yeah, I think it's really important, to understand their strengths, right? For them to that's what we really want them to rely on when things get really tough. We don't want them relying on their weaknesses. We want them to recognize, right, that they have strengths and those are really valuable. And there's also an opportunity to kind of work on their areas of weakness. So I did see a chat question go up. I know I said I'd wait till the end, but I think this actually fits so nicely in here. If that's all right, Commander Duff, if I kind of answer it. The difference between grit and resilience. So grit, passion and perseverance. Resilience is about flexibility, bouncing back, right? So resilience is often can be part of grit. Resilience doesn't often specifically, though, talk about a passion or an interest, right? Resilience is the piece as I'm flexible, right? I continue to bounce back from what happens. And so that tends to be the difference. So grit tends to be a little bit more encompassing in some ways, right? Resilience is really about bouncing back. So I think it's good to understand the difference. Okay. Kind of, I think my last part of this, of what you guys can do to help, right? And that is, understanding, sometimes they will get so, as just young people and even us, right, will get kind of so focused on this big, scary challenge, and it can feel overwhelming. But if we can just break it down, right? We actually have the PRT here this weekend, and I work often with Dr. Wally Bixby, who's our Director of Human Performance here, and one of his key strategies, right, for doing well in the PRT is breaking it down, right? Get to this light pole, get to the first quarter mile. You don't have to think about it as a mile and a half. You can think about it, just get here, right? And that allows you to get through the mile and a half in amazing ways. Right. So again, some of that grit, right? They have this long-term goal they're working towards, understanding, right, that they're small parts, and that kind of if they don't achieve one of the small parts, it's not all over. That there's still ways to push and achieve. Okay. Some more do's and don'ts here. Oh, sorry, I forgot my last one: framing failure. Right. So, building the courage to fail. The Academy talks a lot about courage. I'm a big proponent of courage. For many of you, I hope that got a chance to watch some of the Olympics and are continuing to watch our Paralympic athletes. I think of them as incredibly courageous. They're willing to, we often use the man in the arena quote. If you don't know that quote, I'll encourage you to find it. It's a really wonderful quote about only certain people are willing to go into the arena. And they're willing to dare greatly, and it takes bravery and courage to step into the arena. Your children have decided to step into that arena, and with that decision, right, they are vulnerable. They decided to take on risks, right? They will feel defeat. They will feel victory, but understand that's all part of the process. And they decided, and it's incredibly courageous to step into that arena, and they have allowed themselves to do it. And I think to honor that and to recognize that it takes courage to fail, because that means you put yourself out there. Glad I didn't forget that one. That would have been important. So here you go, some do's and don'ts. This is focused on certainly college age, but I knew I was talking to sponsors and parents who may also have younger children in the home, so I thought I'd just add it all in here. A lot of this comes from my youth athlete work in my Olympic sport. To understand, right? Provide feedback to motivate your child and really provide support. That's really the goal, is to provide support here. We don't really like parents getting involved in too much a correction of skill. Parents so often want to kind of step in and fix, which is so normal, but it really probably doesn't help you provide the support you want. Do provide feedback to reinforce effort, reinforce good behavior, right? We're trying to help them move towards things that are in their control, not things that are out of their control. And so, right, if we can reinforce good behavior, it's great. Sometimes it's not great to really praise the outcome, right? Reinforce effort and personal progress, right? Do let them have choice, like recognize that, right, that these are all adults now in college, right? So recognize they have personal choice now. Having that independence is really valuable to them. And so, right, letting them have that personal choice, voicing their passions, voicing what they're struggling with can be really valuable. Again, not pushing too hard before they're ready. I kind of mentioned that in another slide. And I've said this a little bit along the way, as parents and sponsors, I'll encourage you to like take care of your own needs. Certainly if I said, find your passion in the beginning of my presentation, I said, like, what are you passionate about? Like, think about it for a moment. And if you sat there and said, I have no idea, right? It might be a good opportunity for you to think about what are the things that are important to you? What are your goals? Maybe some of you, this is the first time a child has left your home. Maybe this is the last child that's kind of walked out the door. And so you're reevaluating what your own kind of needs are and goals are now. But I'll encourage you to think about, creating your own passions and your own grit. When they see that, they will tend to imitate it, right? Recognize that like life changes and you kind of continue to move through it. I couldn't help myself. I had to put a couple Winter Olympic quotes on here. I just thought, right, that like, we're in with the Winter Olympics, so I had to use it. I think this was really valuable. This was another skier athlete, right? Sometimes you just need a reminder. You're so focused on where you want to go that you forget how far you've already come. I want you to remember that as parents. Like, I want your children to remember that, right? I'd like you to, remind your children at times of that, right? It's good to recognize, right, the things that they've already achieved, the grittiness they've already shown, right, the passion they've already shown, even if that passion is beginning to change or shift, right, and that you're having to kind of reinforce it in different ways than maybe you're used to. Lindsey Vonn, although maybe a little bit controversial right now, I don't think anybody would debate her grittiness. She's massively passionate and works hard towards that passion. This was her quote after kind of her experience. She's a downhill skier, for those of you who don't know, and has experienced a significant injury, right? I tried, right? I think there's some work effort there. I dreamt her passion, right? And I jumped. She did it, right? And so again, I think it's important to think about, right, this passion and what's really valuable to them, and then helping them work hard towards it despite facing failures and setbacks. I'm actually, I think now at my time, Commander Duff, we got to our time here. I would love to see if there's any questions here in the chat. I think I've only seen one so far. Commander Duff, if you'd like to add anything as well to my presentation.
Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity. I think that, you did a great job. I did appreciate the question of the difference between grit and resilience. Because we talk about these things and people can kind of almost see them as the same thing. And I think your explanation was good, that resilience is the bounce back and grit can be conceptualized as like the long game, right? If you don't have the grit for the long vision, and we talk about that a lot when I'm in here in my office with the midshipmen, it could just be a series of responding to stressors and overwhelm. And yeah, you're bouncing back, but like, where are you going? And if you have grit, you have a vision of a goal that you want to get to. If you don't have that resilience, the first hit is going to take you off track. And it's okay. We always talk about it's okay to get off track. I'm from Philadelphia. I use the analogy of like driving down 95. You get off at the wrong exit, you hit a speed bump and you go out this way. As long as you know what the ultimate goal is, you just go loop back around and get back on the road. But you have to know where it is you want to go to. And so it's good to have goals. And the one thing I spent a lot of time talking about is milestones. And Dr. Muller, we didn't really talk about it, but you wore the uniform, you served as a Navy psychologist. And so the idea of, you go away for a deployment. I was gone for 9 months on more than one occasion from my family. And I never wanted to think about, the night before, being on the precipice of 9 months away from my family. But before that aircraft carrier pulled out, I'm thinking about the 2 weeks until I'm in England, and I've never been to England, and I can do anything for 2 weeks type of deal. And then there was days when you go week to week, and Sundays are brunches on the ship with a nice meal and Kenny G playing in the wardroom, and that was something that could motivate you. And then there was days you had to go meal to meal, as we say. But if you set up these milestones, these things to look forward to, you're on a run, you don't know when the run's going to end, and you say, I can get to that tree. And then you get to that tree, and then you say, all right, I can get to the next tree. And so just these long goals need to have milestones. So I think if we're talking about grit and resilience, we need to talk about kind of putting these like little stop gaps in for the midshipmen and any of us to kind of take a breather. Anybody that has diving experience, it's called you do your dive stop. You hear, you catch your breath, you take it in, and then you get ready to hit the mark before you come back from your dive. It's the same idea. We're not just running consistently. I've used the metaphor of just trying to swim without taking a breath. And yeah, you might get to the other side, but I don't know that you're going to get back. Even if you get back, you're not going to get back again on that next lap efficiently. And eventually you're going to tuck her out. And so every breath is coffee with a friend, calling home, going to church, going for a run, making a big boy, big girl decision that night and going to bed early. Or the next night making that big boy, big girl decision and staying up with your friends, because that's what you needed. You needed the social aspect, and then you'll put the time in for the schoolwork the next night. So there's balance and there's vision, and these milestones and this long-term vision can actually help. Over.
We got a great question in here, which I do think is on what we're talking about, and that it's specifically related to services at the MDC. So Commander Duff, if you had a recommendation, what would you do if you wanted your child to seek out some help for personal relationships? How would you recommend that they get the help they need at the academy?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and that's part of why we do this, right? And that's part of why we speak to the parents before the mids even get here, before they're even mids, to reinforce that. They hear it from their leadership, they hear it from the DONT, the soup. Everybody says, go to the MDC, talk to the chaplains, take advantage of the resources, use your chain of command. We didn't talk much about the peer advisor team. We train other midshipmen to look out for signs of psychological distress when a midshipman may need help. And yes, we want them to be good midshipmen, but we're essentially preparing them to be good officers too, who know how to go knee to knee and have those conversations. And so if somebody really needed to get to the MDC, I think it helps when they get that reinforcement from home. But I can tell you a couple months ago, I had a midshipman say, hey, sir, this isn't really my thing. I'm not really into the whole therapy or counseling thing, but my chain of command thought it was a good idea. And I trust my lieutenant, and my girlfriend thought it would be a good idea for me to come. So that's why I'm here. And that's all we want as the MDC, is the opportunity to have that engagement, have that conversation, and try to get them to come back for another session if that's what's necessary. So I would just say that for the midshipmen, come up for air, look around, see all the people, see all the resources that are around you, and maybe work at the lowest levels to the peer, maybe display some vulnerability and say to Johnny, the roommate, dude, I'm just haven't been sleeping this last week. And then Johnny, in more cases than not, is gonna go, yeah, me neither, man. You go, dude, right? Like we've been running ragged, and then boom, those two start sharing back and forth, and MDC doesn't need to be a part of the picture. But when it does, there's a hierarchy. There's no wrong door. You can come to MDC at any point. We'll either keep you in house or get you to the right resource. If there's loss, we can talk about loss as psychologists and social workers. But we might also say, hey, our colleagues over here at the Chaplain Center are really good with this type of stuff too. So this could be an adjunct referral where they go see them solely or along with us, or solely the chaplains take it from there. So there's a lot of resources out there. We try to encourage the mids to come up for air and look around and see what they have around them. But we also have a lot of eyes on and make sure that when it is hard to see what's there, that somebody else might be able to see it for you. Over.
Can I add, Commander Duff, if that's all right? Just that I will say, having them seek out on-campus resources, there can be a bit of an advantage to that because we work within this system.
And so psychological care, especially outside in the community, can be really wonderful, but they don't understand the system. And they, have to write records in different ways than we do. And so I really do encourage people to, use the system resources, because we understand, what the rules are for commissioning and those types of things. And psychologists or social workers or counselors outside of our system may not recognize that documentation process. And so I really think, seeking out in-house resources is usually the kind of most helpful way to go for their kind of continued success at the academy. I don't see any other questions. I think we're kind of just about at our time. Anything else, Commander Duff, you wanted to add before we sound off?
Was it Mr. Lockman that had his hand raised and he just wanted to?
I don't know.
Thank you, sir. I thought I saw a hand raised.
I did. I asked them to put the question in. I said, "Oh, thank you. This is such a great." When MIDs make contact and speak to someone, is that confidential? There's a question. Commander Duff, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. The answer is we don't have full confidentiality at the MDC, not like the chaplains would. But for the most part, they do. They can come in here and they can speak about stuff, and we're very clear about what those limits might look like and when we would have to inform the chain of command or make a referral over to the medical side of the house. And I will tell you, having been in the room where it happens, if you would, with the leadership, when we do brief these things up, it's really a commanding officer, he or she wants to know that Johnny or Susie is struggling only in the way that allows them to assure that the right resources are going towards that individual. Like, they don't need all the details about, this, that, or whatever it might be that Johnny's struggling with, but they want to know, hey, doc, what's going on? Can they do the job? If not, what do we need to do? What can I do as a leader to get my resources, my assets pointed in the right direction to help this individual? And we recognize that. So we protect their confidentiality, even when it seems like we have to share something with a chain of command. It's because they can move mountains in some ways, the leadership, to make sure that the people get what they need. And so there are certain parameters about safety to self, to others. If somebody is just not doing well, they're not taking care of themselves the right way, maybe not making good decisions one way or another, they do lose a little bit of the ability to drive the bus, if you would, and control their own destiny, where somebody else is going to say, hey, we really need you to go here. Now, nobody can be directed to come to the MDC. Us as a counseling center, you have to want to be here. Now, if there's a concern or an issue that's worrisome enough, the command will direct them to the medical side of the house. But anybody that's here at the MDC is here voluntarily. You want to add to that at all, Jess?
Just some stats. So to reinforce kind of how safe it is, 97%, when we've done this data kind of drive, 97% of those who attend MDC for psychological counseling get their #1 service selection. It's a pretty high number in terms of, like, that's when we last time did that data. We also found in a recent class, 38% of a graduating class will have sought counseling at the Midshipman Development Center. So that's over 1 in 3 midshipmen have sought counseling here. So obviously we don't have like a massive exodus of students, right? Not being able to commission or get their service assignment. So it just kind of gives you an idea of the numbers that we see and really how safe it is to come and seek out counseling here.
Oh, okay. Oh, another question here. Thank you. Is there a 24-hour contact number for the MIDs if a MID or roommate is in crisis? Commander Duff, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so the midshipmen have access to, and all the midshipmen that are on watch, anybody that's in the military understands what somebody's on watch, somebody's on a duty to respond to everything from a broken pipe to some sort of medical/physical injury to some sort of psychological distress. And so there's the first echelon is at the midshipman level, and then it goes up to the company officers, and the SELs also stand watch. And then the chaplains also have a watch, the 24-hour duty. And then even we, as psychiatrists and psychologists, or psychiatrists on the medical side of the house, we in uniform, we carry the duty phone for a week or two at a time also. So the midshipman wouldn't necessarily call me in the middle of the night directly. And if they didn't want to talk to one of their peers, that's fine. They could call and speak to the chaplain. Full confidentiality, no pen to paper, if you would. But if there is something that needs immediate action, the chaplains are really good, even in the realm of confidentiality, of getting the midshipmen to where they need to be, getting the right resources pointed in their direction. And then if the chaplains or the company officers or SELs need a little support, want to talk it through with us, we are available also 24/7 if they want to talk it through and say, hey, doc, what's the deal here? And sometimes we can call ahead if we think somebody needs to go to the hospital to get further care and kind of help facilitate it. And sometimes it's just, yeah, have them come see me in the morning and they can come do that. So we help them manage crises, but we also help set them up for something that could be urgent, not necessarily a crisis, but urgent. And we get them in, and the MDC has triage and walk-in hours throughout the day. And that's pretty helpful. Over.
So maybe our last question here is we're going to try to end at 1300 here, but it's a great question. How do you support a midshipman when a friend gets separated?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I always tell the mids is like, your friends are your friends, right? Whether they're still here at this school or that school or whatever they're doing. And in some way, they have to kind of get their head around that. And the example is, the analogy is, when I'm deployed far and away, I'm on the other side of the world. I still have a role. I'm still father, husband, brother, son. And what are the boundaries? What are the parameters of those different relationships look like? And so does that mean more phone calls? More than, maybe on some level, that whole absence makes the heart grow fonder thing. Maybe there's something there. Maybe we're writing more often. Maybe we've set it up that we speak every Saturday. But every other day I'm getting an email from my family. And the same thing could be true with when a friend leaves here. You guys have been through some stuff. Maybe you went through plebe summer, you were on a sport team, and now that person isn't right down the hall. So the nature of that relationship has changed, but at its core, that's still your person. That's still the one that you can reach out to, that you can text message. And these young men and women, even my kids at 6, 12, and 13, are pretty good with staying in touch with people. We've PCS'd a few times, and my younger kids are still good at like texting, video chatting with their friends from like other duty stations. And so back in the day, we would have had to have been pen pals or something, and the technology can actually help with that. So we don't see that often. We know that it happens often enough. I don't know that it always rises to the level of coming to see a psychologist or something like that. But when you live and work here, like I said, we're in the building. I lived on the yard for 2 years. You meet and interact with midshipmen in a variety of ways. Jess is out there supporting them at their sporting events. Me and my family are out there supporting them at their events. And so you get to know them. And so sometimes you have your officer hat on. Sometimes it's your doctor hat. And sometimes it's just like Jason Duff, 51-year-old dude who's been through life and had a friend leave in his freshman year, after his sophomore year, of doing some hard things together, and how we maintain those relationships. And I think exactly to that question, I had a friend I'm friends with today. Oh, did we get kicked out? Or did you change something? I had a friend who never graduated from the college I went to, and he's still one of my best friends today. So it's possible, it's doable. There is a precedent for maintaining these relationships. And it is something we kind of have to get good at. Over.
Wonderful. So I think we're essentially 2 minutes left, probably a good point to kind of begin to end. I don't see any other questions. I love that question around how do you support somebody who's been separated. Commander Duff, I think you got it. All the things I would say about the same stuff. So it is hard. But maybe the only thing I would add is that, it's only one door for that midshipman that's closed. And lots have now opened. And so the way in which that friend can help them maybe even recognize what are the new ways in which, right? So to help them, process the sense of loss they may experience at losing the opportunity to graduate from the academy, and also to recognize, right, that they have so many probably skills and values they can bring forward
into lots of different opportunities. But it's really hard to get separated from here if this is what your passion was. So, last thoughts, Commander Duff, before we close it out.
Thank you guys. Thank you for your interest in this topic and wanting to lean in and have these hard conversations and be that resource. And to be fair, I just want to kind of double tap the importance of it in that, you know, if you were to take a poll, the majority of parents and sponsor parents want to help. And maybe they just don't know how. And so this can kind of give you some of that blueprint on how to do that. And so my analogy for that is somebody has a medical emergency, you want to help, but if you didn't have the introduction to CPR and you don't know that the first thing you do is make a phone call, you're going to feel stuck. And hopefully this can help maybe some of you guys feel unstuck and give you something actionable that you can use immediately. Not because somebody's in crisis, just because this place is hard. And to have conversations about grit and resilience can be helpful any day of the week. So thank you guys for your questions. Thank you for your time. We'll see you guys again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.